amendment be agreed to. I give the call to the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In my electorate of Melbourne, there are more women as a proportion of the workforce than there are anywhere else in Victoria. And in fact, it's the second highest proportion of women in the workforce of any electorate in the country. We've got 49% of the workforce comprised of women. And one thing that is crystal clear is that if we value people's mental health, people's family stability, but also if we value getting women into the workforce and being able to remain in the workforce, then affordable and accessible and quality childcare is absolutely vital. And in Melbourne, the need is only going to grow. More and more people are choosing to live closer to the city. Our state government has a policy of, if there's a small warehouse somewhere, knock it down and build the tallest, most expensive thing that you can on it. That brings in lots of people into the city, which is a good thing, but increasingly we're finding there is no planning for the childcare needs of the people who live in Melbourne. And so we have a situation at the moment in Melbourne where 76% of the centres in Melbourne have no vacancies for under 2. 76% have no vacancies for under 2. And 43% had no vacancies for 3 to 4 year olds. And of the centres that did have some vacancies, they were often inflexible, for example, only available on particular days. And it's not at all uncommon for women in my electorate to have to do the juggle in the morning of during the week of having to get your child to different childcare centres at different days of the week. What we know is that parents often spend, or usually spend on average, between 6 and 24 months waiting for a place for their children. And some centres in the electorate of Melbourne have over 300 families on their waiting list. And the level of unmet demand and the lack of places for childcare in Melbourne is appalling. It is absolutely appalling. And one of the things that we know is that these pressures developed under the previous government. And I'll be the first to say that the previous government did some good things about childcare. Labor's focus on improving the standards of childcare workers and recognising their role as educators and lifting the quality framework was something the Greens were pleased to support because it echoed our view that childcare should be treated as an integral part in the education process for young children. But what wasn't recognised by Labor is that if you increase the quality of the workforce as one should, then unless you put additional money into the system, then the other two key elements of childcare, accessibility, the ease to get a place, and affordability, making sure that childcare is within your means, will suffer. And that's exactly what we have seen, and that's exactly the problem that we have faced. And of course it wasn't made any better by the previous government's decision to abandon building 222 new childcare centres. So we're in a position where there is enormous demand but enormous pressure on the system, especially in inner city Melbourne. We have to decide now which way we're going to go. Do we value childcare as a community or don't we? And then into the fray comes this government and says, well, the first thing we'll do, before we've decided to do anything else, the first thing we'll do, after freezing some existing funds that were going to find their way into childcare, the first thing that we're going to do is freeze the childcare rebate for a further 3 years, and we're going to freeze the childcare benefit income thresholds. Now, taking money out of the system is not the answer for childcare at the moment. It is just not the answer. When this was proposed, and I think in some respects, Deputy Speaker, the opposition needs to tone down its sanctimony on this because the freezing of the childcare rebate is in fact just extending a policy that Labor introduced. And it was wrong then and it's wrong now. So that part of it is wrong, but what the government is also proposing to do with respect, when you look at both of those things in tandem, the childcare rebate and the childcare benefit, it's going to hit low-income earners, and it's going to hit a family that earns, or a household that earns $60,000, somewhere in the order of $3,000 a year. Now that is a massive whack. When childcare under the previous government has got to the point where some parents now make the decision, is it even worth returning to work because of the cost of childcare, to now take an extra $3,000 out of the pockets of a middle to low income family is absolutely appalling and wrong. And the sector is outraged by this government's decision to take money out of childcare, and so are centres in my electorate. One centre, Fitzroy Acacia Crace, which I've visited a couple of times and which provides services to people on low incomes, they believe that helping families get affordable childcare is very important. And they're a community childcare centre that works with many people who are refugees, single parents, and people from low SES backgrounds. And they see a lot of families that want to contribute and work, but they can't get jobs without affordable childcare. And if parents can't access childcare, the kids end up staying home and falling behind in education. And these are children who often come here, part of families from refugee backgrounds who have come in under Australia's humanitarian system. They're living in the flats in Fitzroy. The parents are struggling to break into the labour market or hang on to a job, and they are reliant. They are reliant on low-cost childcare to be able to stay employed. Fitzroy Acacia Crace have said that as a result of changes in this bill and the budget, they've decided to freeze their fees because they know otherwise parents wouldn't be able to continue. But as a result, the staff aren't getting a pay rise. Already underpaid staff aren't getting a pay rise. And they face a big problem with retaining staff, as many childcare centres do. And this is only going to exacerbate it. And what will that mean? What will that mean? It will mean people, predominantly women, deciding to opt out of the workforce because they can't afford, because they're on low incomes and they can't afford now the cost of childcare. And so you're going to increase the unemployment rate. That's the effect of this government's policy that attacks disproportionately low-income earners. There will be more women who can now no longer stay connected with their job because they just won't be able to afford childcare. Not everyone can do what Fitzroy Acacia Crace is doing. The other centres in my electorate have fantastic staff, but they've got many boards of management who are just tearing their hair out trying to make ends meet. And the problem is there's plenty of money available for us if we decided that childcare was a priority. For example, if the government chose to stand up to wealthy miners like Gina Reinhardt and her associates and just scrap the subsidies and concessions that they get, don't even worry about a new tax, just scrap the subsidies and concessions they get, make the likes of Gina Reinhardt pay the same for petrol as everyone else in this country and stop giving them subsidised diesel. Take away those concessions and there's $13 billion available for the budget. Now, $13 billion builds a lot of childcare centres and would allow those existing childcare centres to expand. It is ultimately a question of priorities. And what this government is choosing is a priority in favour of the likes of Gina Reinhardt and letting her off the hook, because she is, for all intents and purposes, untouched by this budget, and instead saying, we don't mind if the women in the Fitzroy flats are now no longer able to continue in their job because they can't afford to send their kids to childcare. They've got to contribute. A family on $60,000 has to contribute $3,000 a year, and that might be the difference between working or not, or childcare or not. But we'll let Gina off the hook. will let our wealthy backers off the hook and the top end of town off the hook. And that's what this budget is, and that's what this bill does. So we'll be opposing it. And that means, hopefully, this will be opposed in the Senate as well. Because what's important and what matters is making sure Australia is a place where people look after each other, and where no matter how much money you earn or where you come from, if you want to do the right thing and try and get into work, there will be a childcare place available for you. And we're not going to discriminate against people on the basis of their wealth. That's what's at stake here in this budget and with this bill. And I'm pleased to hear that Labor may now oppose it, even though they proposed some of these measures in the last parliament. But I do want to address something that some of the opposition speakers have said, which is to suggest that somehow having increased or having potentially paid parental leave as a workplace right is somehow wrong when the money should be put into childcare instead. Now, let me say this, Mr Deputy Speaker, if I had an unlimited pot of money, yes, I'd probably go and build childcare centres first and foremost as well. But I'd say to Labor, if it's that important, why didn't Labor put a 1.5% levy on big business and build new childcare centres? They didn't. They didn't have the guts to stand up to big business and raise the revenue that's needed to fund the services Australians expect. Instead, Labor said we're going to cut the taxes for corporate Australia, and as a consequence we're not going to build 222 new childcare centres. So I'm not going to be lectured to by the opposition about the lack of priorities or how if you advance the cause of paid parental leave, somehow that's money that shouldn't be going to childcare. If you really believe that, you'd have done it, and you didn't. Not only that, but the proposal that the Greens took to the election was to put a new levy on big business for money that wouldn't otherwise be there, use that to fund a paid parental leave scheme, and ask others to chip in so that we can have the childcare that everyone deserves. So it's not an either-or. It's not an either-or. And Labor does not come to this with clean hands, having previously proposed one of the freezers in this bill and having failed to act to build those new childcare centres that are needed. But we've got to deal with the bill that's in front of us, and the bill that's in front of us will only do one thing, and that is make life harder for people on middle to low incomes and take money out of the childcare system at a time when we need to be putting more money in it. And for that reason, this bill cannot be supported. And this bill, like many other budget measures, is going to be blocked by this parliament. It's going to be blocked by this parliament. There's only another week and a bit to go before the new Senate changes over, and I'll tell you what, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are billions of dollars in so-called savings measures from the government, which are really a tax on the young and the old and the sick and the poor, that are not going to find their way through this parliament. And I hope that after 1st of July they won't find their way through the parliament then as well, because there's a reason that people are still talking about the budget so long after the fact, and that is that people understand that measures like this threaten what's good about this country. They threaten what's good about this country, and the Prime Minister is a threat to the Australian way of life and the principle of egalitarianism. And it is our job as the Greens to stand up for those principles of compassion and sustainability and equality, and to defend that spirit that beats at the heart of this country of egalitarianism, that says we will not become a US-style society where your access to healthcare or your access to education or your access to childcare depends on your wealth. We don't want to go down that road. We value the fact that here in this country we look after each other. This bill is just one element of a very brutal budget, and I'm very, very pleased that the Greens will block it.